Hey, this is Matthew. Welcome back to Nerd News today. Once again, we've got another Japanese figure review. Well, this time it's actually a pair of Japanese figures. And what we're looking at today, these are again more Charapro figures. These are bronze figures of Japanese wrestlers. So we're gonna basically just kind of look at an overview of the bronze figure today because that's not really an action figure unto itself. It's a type of figure that came out in that same time period of all the toys we've been looking at so far. So what we have here today on this side here, we've got an Inoki, we have a Tenryu. I would have had another third figure, but didn't come in the mail, unfortunately. Hopefully that comes at a later date. Bronze figures were kind of interesting. You know, when I was first looking into Japanese figures years ago, I always found these guys to be fairly cheap, and even today they are still on the cheaper side because they're just unpainted, essentially. They're one tone of paint, and it's rather unimpressive looking, as you can see here. It kind of just turns into this dark black color here, this kind of onyx shade. But at the end of the day, these figures are just remolded versions of previous releases, so that actually makes it a kind of cool way to get these toys and more affordable. And for example, just to show you guys what I'm talking about, here is the same version of Inoki, but the actual painted version. And this is in particular really cool one because both versions here come with the NWF title, which are really nice looking belts. We're going to review this Inoki in full color on a different day, but for now let's talk more about these bronzes. So yeah, for the most part, they were essentially the same release, just different packaging. Like you can see with the Inoki here, his actually says official bronze type figure on the front of it there, and it's from the Hyper Heroes line. And so there was a bunch of figures that were done like in this style. That was part of like the initial Bronze Wave line. That had guys like Hashimoto, Ogawa, Muto, Akiyama, Riki Choshu had one, Misawa. Obviously Inoki had several. Jushin Liger had one, and there was like a few other guys that were part of this version of the line with this type of packaging. But then you had other guys like this, other versions of characters like Tenryu who came essentially in the exact same style packaging you got the normal Tenryu figure, just with the bronze figure inside. And just so you guys can see the back. Again, the backs are also pretty much the same what you get with any of the other figures. And case in point here, we'll look at this again, Inoki figure, the plain. This is the colored version I'm holding on the far left here. It's identical packaging to what you would have gotten with any other normal version. So nothing too exciting, but the figures themselves again are very nice. So I'm gonna go ahead and I think pull these guys out and let's take a better look at them. So here we go, figures are now out of the packaging. And again, this is what I'm talking about. They're just monochrome figures in this quote unquote bronze style, so they're calling it. But at the end of the day, they're the exact same molds they use for the full color figures. And I think that's why these guys are so cheap, is that because the color is just so uninteresting that people don't really want to get these, despite them still being identical. You know, for my purposes, it pretty much serves what I wanted. And I'd say these are actually pretty good for an entry-level collector who wants to get some Charapro figures, but doesn't want to spend a lot of money on them. And you'll be able to get like the core characters, some of the most popular wrestlers in this monochrome style here. So yeah, just showing you guys every angle from them. So nothing is different. Again, the articulation is the same, which is to say practically none. All we really have with these guys is the arms that go up and down, and I think their waists should move. Yes, super stiff, but they move. Inoki still has the NWF belt on him. That is a removable belt. So that's, again, that's a really nice handy bonus for him because belts with these Charapro figures tend to be kind of hard to get and makes the toy typically more valuable. So you just got yourself a belt with this figure, and that's a pretty good bargain onto itself. Sculpts, of course, again, identical. I like the sculpts. I have no problems with the sculpts in general with Charapro figures. Good stances, good poses, but otherwise, ultimately, fairly dull, boring, unexciting figures. And there's really not a ton to say about them because they're just, yeah, they are what they are. What you see here is what you get. So despite how bland these are, they did make a ton of them. I already mentioned who was in that first line of the figures that were actually labeled bronze type, but there were plenty other versions of this, and not only that, I guess we're going to talk about variants a little bit now too, because these Charapro figures had a ton of variants in similar monochrome styles, or in some cases, see-through variants. In fact, there are versions of these figures that are transparent. So there's like, you can find red versions, blue versions, uncolored versions. There's even a green version, like there's a green Christmas Misawa, basically. You can get like Jushin Liger in 3 different versions, like the red, blue, and uncolored transparent versions, which actually look pretty cool. I think that the clear versions look much better than these bronze figures here, in fact, but I don't have any of those just yet. But in addition to these bronze, there's also been a few gold figures. Not many of them. There are a few golden figures, which are kind of neat as well. Those look pretty cool. But I imagine that something that's got the gold paint will probably eventually catch the green disease, as they call it. And that's where that yellow golden paint kind of starts changing and becoming green over time, which is much less attractive. There's also probably one of the rarest of these all, besides the gold being super rare. I think the rarest might actually be the sepia versions of these figures. Very few of those were made. I think they were super duper limited as well. I've seen like a sepia version of Kenta Kobashi, which was really stunning looking, but again, a lot of money. So it's just kind of funny that These bronze figures here are probably one of the cheapest ways to get Charapro figures, but as you start getting into the other variants like the clears and the gold and sepia versions, those dramatically increase in value and price, making them really untouchable for anybody except the most hardcore collectors. So are these figures worth getting? You know, as I said, it depends on what your purposes are for these guys. For what I want to do with them and how I'm going to display these guys and use them, yeah, I'm fine with it. And I paid not a lot for these guys. Even like 10 years ago when High Spots used to have a lot more of these figures, they were still among the cheapest ones to get. They were like $10 to $15. I ended up actually getting these guys for $5 a piece. And I got a few more on the way as well that I didn't pay much for. So if you just want to get a few really cool, simple looking figures, then they're totally fine. I think another great thing about them is you could actually repaint them if you wanted. And they're essentially already primed for that. But I would still probably actually find a way to strip the paint if possible, and then reprime them and do all that stuff. But again, for what they are, you know, it's hard for me to recommend them unless you want something just really cheap and really simple for your collection. If you do want that, then go ahead and get them. They're easy to find, but they're really not for everybody. So I just want to give you guys a taste of the bronzes because we're not going to really look at too many more of them in the future. If I get any of the clear versions or the other variants I mentioned, those are going to be worth taking a look at. But bronze figures, I think we've seen enough of them here today. So that's a quick Charapro look at some bronze type figures from Japanese wrestlers, and that's our Inoki with the NWF title and just a classic style Tenryu. And just so you guys are aware too, I've managed to find these pictures of all these variants on a WrestleFigs board, in fact, from this particular user that you see here. And so he, I guess, has done a lot of the legwork for uncovering what all these figures were, uncovering as many of these variants as he could find. So shout out to that guy whose name I can't remember right now while making this video, but there's his name one more time for you guys. You know, the history of these figures and finding information about any of them in general is always difficult, so I'm grateful to anybody who has information out there. And I'm hoping that over time we can make a nice compilation of all of that stuff and really inform people about what these toys are all about. So until next time, I'm Matthew. Thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more Japanese pro wrestling figures, American pro wrestling figures, everything else that we do here on Nerd News Today, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. And until next time, be safe and keep that fighting spirit burning.